Τσεκ, τσεκ. Τσεκ, τσεκ, τσεκ. One, two. Γεια σου.
Hey, hey, hey. Check, check. Okay.
Studio 969.
ξεκινήσουν να μιλάνε όταν ξεκινήσουν, έτσι.
Ναι, είναι αναμένα.
Ναι.
Hello, welcome to this meeting. It has a very interesting or intriguing title, Listen to Those Who Don't Have a Voice. That is a topic that we're going to discuss with two ombudsmen, the Dutch ombudsman and the Greek ombudsman, and we'll discuss the role of the ombudsman in the European social and state structure, trying to focus exactly on what the title of this event is, giving voice to the voiceless, or listening to those who don't have a voice. Having said that, I would like to invite the director of the Thessaloniki Film Festival, who is our hostess today here in Thessaloniki, Ms. Elise Jalado, to tell us a few words.
Yes. Oops, I need my glasses, sorry. So welcome to this to the Cinema Olympion. It works. Okay. Welcome to this panel discussion, dear colleagues and friends. The panel discussion will focus on a topic of paramount importance, the role that the Ombudsman have in the functioning of the European democracies. On this special occasion, marking the 50th anniversary of the restoration of democracy in Greece, it's crucial to reflect on how institutions like Ombudsman have contributed to the consolidation of our democratic values. Their independence, impartiality, and ability to investigate complaints in an unbiased way make them essential actors in maintaining accountability and transparency in our societies. Across Europe, ombudsmen have been valuable allies in the fights against corruption, abuses of power, and human rights violations. Their presence reinforces citizens' trust in democratic institutions by providing an effective recourse in case of injustice. However, despite the progress made, challenges persist. Ombudsmen must continue to strengthen and be supported so that they can fulfill their mandate to the fullest. This involves ensuring their independence from political power, providing them with the necessary resources, and ensuring that their recommendations are followed through. In this time, when European democracies are facing new challenges, including the rise of populism and threats to the rule of law, it is more important than ever to recognize their vital role. They are essential safeguards for preserving our democratic values and ensuring that the lessons of the past are never forgotten. So thank you. And I want to thank also the Ombudsman Institute for this very fundamental discussion. Thank you again. So I give the mic back.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Jalado. And now I'd like to invite the ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Susanna Terstal. Why? Because this whole meeting is taking place under the auspices of the embassy.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Oh, okay. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be able to say a few words. It's great to have the two ombudsmen and people from their offices together during this festival. The two institutions work together since the Greek ombudsman was created. And in the last few years, the Dutch government has been able to support this cooperation in order for the two institutions to exchange knowledge and expertise with each other. Both offices are continuously developing and modernizing their processes and way of working. Through the cooperation, also best practices can be shared and applied. This cooperation is in two directions. Both offices have very strong and experienced teams. The field covered in the cooperation are international processes, auditing, public communication, and reaching the most vulnerable groups who don't complain or are not much heard, sometimes even invisible. And some of the documentaries in this festival are about these groups. Closed Cities by Steve McQueen is a good example. In the cooperation, there are two areas that are important to both of our countries. Migration is one, covering the whole range of challenges from arrival to integration in our society or returns. Climate change and energy poverty is another challenge faced by both our countries, and especially how to protect the most vulnerable people from its effects. One of the themes of the film festival is LGBTIQ rights. I want to congratulate Greece for opening up marriage for people from the same sex. Legally, it's a huge step and it will further acceptance diversity. The recent attack on trans people right on the doorstep of this theater shows how important this is. To that end, the Netherlands is one of the countries to embrace the feminist foreign policy. The way we interpret this is that it is truly about diversity, not only about men and women. Everybody has a right to be, and this should be respected. Also in Greece, the embassy is active in working with diverse and often vulnerable groups in society. Therefore, I applaud the film festival for its choices of films and documentaries, and I'm very much looking forward to Europride in June, in which the embassy will take part as well. Thank you.
Well, after thanking Mrs. Susanna Terstal and the Embassy of the Netherlands in Greece for their support for this event, let's get to our panel discussion here. I'm Panos Polizoidis. I'm a Greek journalist. And with me, I have two ombudsmen, the Dutch ombudsman, Mr. Reinier von Zutphen, and the Greek ombudsman, Andreas Potakis. So I'd like to discuss with you some of the... Oh, yes, you are a mister, sorry. I'd like to discuss with you some of the themes that were introduced by our two previous speakers. And I'd like to start with our guest, if you don't mind, Mr. van Zutphen. The Ombudsman is supposed to take care of people who happen to be vulnerable in a particular situation, and that could be anyone, against a person that comes up against some particular difficulty when dealing with the state apparatus. And the other case is when you have to deal and offer support to people who belong to vulnerable groups. So they don't just happen to be in a vulnerable position in a particular situation, but they are in a vulnerable group as a permanent state. How can you best, or how do you best serve these two different cases? Or are they as different as I imagine?
Yes, they are different, but at the same time, they're more alike than you see from the outside. Let's say classical ombuds work means someone comes to your office and is complaining about something any governmental body has done in a way that is not appropriate. And there's a complaint about it. You handle the complaint, you make a solution, or you analyze the situation, and you give your, let's say, your judgment, your decision, sometimes followed by a recommendation. That is for people who have the possibility and the strength to go to your office and to complain there, or to go to the screen and use digital means to file your complaint. What we're talking here is about those people who are not able to reach by themselves your office or formulate the complaint or have the skills to do so, and it's not because they are not let's say intelligent enough, but it's because they are in a situation where they are focusing on what do we eat tonight? Can I send my kids to school? How do I spend the money? There is not enough, and not just one moment, but day after day. So ombudsmen deal normally with people on these individual cases, and we have to look where they are. We have to find them. So we have to go literally on the streets and talk with those who are dealing with these vulnerable people on a daily basis. The other thing is about the groups you mentioned. If you listen carefully to those who come to your office, if you listen carefully to people who are knowledgeable upon what's happening, for example, here in Thessaloniki or in my hometown Amsterdam, they know where to find the people. So there it is about how to make recommendations to report in a way that not just the individual is helped, but that the whole group. And then you must think of people living in poverty, people with disabilities, people with a other background than the typical Dutch national, people coming from other countries, migrants, people who work for just a few years in our country in low-paid jobs. You know, those are the ones who need actually government most, and who are at the same time mostly forgotten by government. And there we have to play a role.
But in those cases, I suspect things are rather different, because the vulnerability of specific groups is institutionalized. Like if I walk into a public service office and I'm not offered the services that are envisaged by law, I come to you and complain, and you can look up the law and intervene. Yes. But when we talk about vulnerable groups, then it is an institutional framework that would need to be changed. That's not your job, is it?
Well, the good part is I can formulate my job as I want, actually. And I do, and I also do so from time to time. Not always. There is also laws, and there is all sorts of other things that is sort of is narrowing my scope. But from time to time, I can broaden my scope by myself, by own motion. So when it comes to people living in poverty, and if I see that it is basically because although we know about who are touched by let's say the government, because although we know where they live and who they are, we do not bring the money to them to support them. I can sort of make a sort of general recommendation on how to change the law. Although in the law of the Ombudsman is said that the Ombudsman should not make recommendations or go into the details of the law, but I do. And I do it in a way to say, well, look, this is harming people. If you want, and this is not appropriate, harming people by government is not appropriate. If you want to change that, there's only one solution, it's to change the law. So I try to find a sort of bypasses to stick to my, let's say, jurisdiction, and at the same time broaden it up so that people know what should be done.
So you're trying to step on other people's turf sometimes, or to the extent that it's possible. Let's go to the Greek experience, Mr. Potakis. Now, how much do you feel the Greek ombudsman, in your own experience, has the ability to carry out these particular tasks and intervene and try and shape policy, even, you know, in a very distant and indirect manner?
Okay, before I address your question, let me first express my gratitude to the festival and to the embassy for having us here and for organizing this talk.
I forgot to say that you are the outgoing president of the board of directors of the European Charter of the International Ombudsman Institute.
Yes.
And Mr. van Zutten is your successor.
Yes.
Is the incoming one.
Correct, correct, correct.
I'm the heir presumed.
I will try to address the question in the most simple and swift way that I can. I would agree with most of what Rainier mentioned earlier. I would like to elaborate a bit more on how do we try to get people who apparently or prima facie do not have the possibility of addressing a complaint to us to do so. I think the key here is that apart from making our work visible and understandable to the wider public, it is of paramount importance that we actually make the effort to reach out to those people. They are incapable, for a variety of reasons, of reaching out to us, of coming into our office, of using our platform. They may not even speak the language. They may not even understand the procedures or the processes, right? So we have to
it's two-way traffic, right?
It's two-way traffic, and it has to be this way. We have to be there. We have to be in the field. We have to be there. We cannot just wait behind our desks to receive a complaint, to assess the complaint, and to issue a decision or a recommendation for policy change or even legislative reform. We have to be there, and the experience and the knowledge that we get from being there and from understanding exactly how they are treated, how they have to deal with the problems, their daily problems, the struggles that they have to go through that Rainier was mentioning earlier, the insecurity that they are experiencing, the uncertainty. It is impossible to experience it from a piece of paper, from a complaint that one might file through a platform or online or a telephone call, right? You have to be there. You have to actually live it. And I think that part of our work, part of our job is also to feel what vulnerable group, what marginalized group of people within our societies are experiencing. Otherwise, our aid, our assistance would be half and would not be as effective as it could be.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying that it would be a half-baked experience, and it would bring you, it would create some distance from people if you were not in the position to be in the field as much as possible.
Exactly.
And then, you know, if there is a distance between the citizen and you, then we might as well stick to the red tape. There is a distance between us and the state machinery anyway.
Exactly.
But how much do you do that?
Yeah, but this brings me to actually attempting to address your question, which has to do with resources. It has a lot to do with resources. So how can an ombudsman work be an effective contribution to solving problems that especially the most vulnerable or the most marginalized amongst our fellow men are experiencing? It is it largely has to do with resources. Resources, financial, resources in terms of the appropriate staff, and it also has to do with having the necessary arsenal, legislative arsenal, the tools, in order to have an effective intervention, in order to be able to make a significant contribution to the lives of those people. Now, the Greek experience, and I'm going to refer to the Greek experience because Rainier knows it, I envy the Dutch experience a lot. The Greek experience is not a very pleasant one in that respect. I don't need to remind you that we are still experiencing the aftermath of a prolonged recession, of a prolonged fiscal crisis. We still have not come fully, we're not clear out of that period. We're still experiencing the aftermath of that period. And this has had an effect also on the Ombudsman institution, much like it has had an effect on all public institutions.
Yes, underfunding is a very common complaint coming, you know, out of all directions in the public sector, and you are the public sector.
Exactly, and I'm not referring only to the underfunding of my institution. I'm referring to underfunding of social infrastructure. I'm referring to underfunding of programs that would have made it slightly better for those people who do need the benefit, who do need the social support, to get access to some form of support to improve their daily lives, that's slightly that much better. So the task of the Ombudsman becomes even more difficult, not because the Ombudsman doesn't have the funds to be out there, doesn't have the funds or the staff or the human resources to undertake all the things that one would have wanted to do, but it becomes more difficult because there's
more demand for your services.
And the policies are not there. So if you don't have the policies in place, then there's not much that you can work with. There's not much recommendation you can do if the policies are not there. The recommendation is to improve the policy.
Okay, your work is, in a broad sense, political, and therefore it has ideological undertones. And these ideological undertones may not match the government of the day. I'm not asking you to tell me whether it's happened to you. I'm assuming it can happen to any of the ombudsmen. So a policy recommendation that you may have in mind because of the values that the ombudsman's institution represents may run against the will of the majority of the people as expressed in the government of the day. How do you tackle this?
I agree with you that the work of the Ombudsman is political, but it's not party political. So I'm not in, I do my duty as every 4 years I go and vote for whoever, but every day I'm political when I'm doing my work. Mm-hmm. Because what we say is of importance and influence of what's happening in Parliament, in policy making, in the ministries, at the municipal levels. So, and I realize that very well. And there's actually 2 or 3 things there that guide me. First, when it comes to an individual complaint, we solve it and we make the governmental body doing their work better. Second is, they should learn from it. Do not make the mistake twice, 3 times, 4 times, or etc. So that's the, and the third part is that the gap between those who have and those who have not is widening. And this is a political statement, actually, but I see it happening every day, and I see the I would say, devastating effects on families, on children, on people, and I feel obliged to make that statement. So all the work we do is also for those who have no voice, to not to be their voice, but to give them a voice so that they can express themselves and show what it is to live in such a vulnerable situation.
But that could bring you in conflict with a government, because what you just said entails a certain degree of criticism of policies followed.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm doing this work now for 9 years, and I'm criticized for every report I wrote.
So basically what you're saying is the more you're criticized, the more happy you are that you're doing your work right.
The harsher the criticism is, the better my report. And this is part of the job. We know that if we write, and when it is a center-right government in the Netherlands or a center-left or ultra, whatever, they will criticize me every time because it is against this or that statement or position or whatever it is. I do my job out of the basics that we, as in any European country, but certainly in the country where I'm the Ombudsman, we have the rule of law. We are pretending that we are a democracy. This means
Did you say pretending?
Yeah, pretending. So, and we should fulfill their task. So it is essential that an ombudsman, and not he alone, but certainly the ombudsman, tells to the people and tells to government where things go wrong. Because it is hurting people. And if you see someone get hurt by somebody else, you take action. And this is apolitical in the sense that it is not something that is in a party program, but it is the basics of the way we should, or we have organized our systems in our countries. And what I do is no more than confronting public officers, but also the people from time to time that complain in my office. I confront them with that what is of importance. You should take people seriously. You should be aware of the effects of your policies, your laws. When you are a parliamentarian, if you're a minister, you take seriously and you be in touch with the reality. If you're the king, you show that we are one nation. So in that circumstances, I have a small part to play. And it is, to come back to your question, yes, that is very political.
Okay. How about, I'm turning now to Mr. Potakis and the Greek experience, how independent, politically independent, do you feel your position is, given that the Ombudsman is selected through a parliamentary procedure? Have you ever felt political pressure during your tenure?
That's an easy question to answer. I don't think any ombudsman would answer differently. I don't think any ombudsman would tell you that he or she has not felt political pressure. We all have felt political pressure of varying levels and degrees and types. But I think it's part of the job. It's part of the job description. As Rainier was mentioning earlier, what we do is usually not very well received by governments. Or at least, let me put it more accurately, I think the times that what we are actually recommending, arguing for, deciding upon, etc., might fall in line with a government policy are the times that our job is not very well publicized. So it's not something that people care about. Normally people care about, and governments care about, when we're actually criticizing them, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're criticizing them all the time. This is a misconception. But sometimes we do have to criticize, and we do have to criticize really heavily. So I cannot think of any ombudsman, and I wouldn't be able to conceive of the ombudsman position without any political pressure from outside, be that parliamentary parties represented in parliament, or even the government itself.
I think this is more or less the case, at least in Greece, with a number of independent regulatory authorities. We have some recent examples of...
Constitutional authorities.
Yes. We have recent examples of the government being very bitter about decisions that were taken by regulatory authorities.
Yes, because...
I'm not talking about you now.
Thank you. But I'll try to explain why, in a very short period of time, obviously. I think that again, I'm referring to what Rainier was mentioning, the concept of the rule of law is perceived to be a quite flexible concept by most governments when in power. So governments when in power, political parties when in power, they have a very, very flexible interpretation, understanding of what the rule of law entails, means, etc.
And they also tend to invoke national interest in some cases.
They do, and for some reason, which is again still something that I'm almost 8 years, slightly less than Rainier, the Ombudsman. It's something that I've never managed to fathom, to understand, how the national interest runs counter to what we ombudsmen at least, understand as the rule of law. I would consider the rule of law to be the supreme national interest, for instance, rather than something that could conflict with whatever national interest may be perceived by the government of the day. But turning to the point on pressures and the role of perhaps and how we are treated by governments and the executive in general, as I mentioned, this is part of the job description, and it shouldn't intimidate us. It doesn't intimidate us. We are used to it. Obviously, there are extremes. And there have been extremes, not just for the other constitutional authorities, but even for the Ombudsman, extreme instances of pressure. But you have to have the stomach.
But the ultimate pressure is that practically, if 2 or 3 parties agree, they don't like you for this job, you're going to lose your job at some point. Okay, you're probably going to find another job, but that is the ultimate pressure, isn't it?
Not really. I'll explain why. Because I think the ombudsman, national ombudsman, as we both are, they play a slightly greater role than what we have been trying to humbly portray so far. We are not only accountable, let's say, to our national parliaments. We are directly reporting to international organizations that supervise the rule of law or the quality or the level of the rule of law in our countries. We report to the European Union on the condition and the respect of the rule of law or of fundamental rights within our countries. We report to the Council of Europe. We report to the Court of Human Rights. So we have a voice, an international voice, a voice that can be heard outside the confines of our own jurisdiction. So this gives us a slightly more power than we normally tend to think of, or we want to admit sometimes. And this is, to a certain extent, intimidating to the executive of the day.
Counter-intimidating in a way, yes. Okay.
Exactly.
Let me go to something practical now. How effective are your services to a plain citizen? Let's leave the organized groups, vulnerable, well, not organized, but the vulnerable groups for a moment, and talk about vulnerable individuals, people like myself who are, can walk into a public service and being dealt with in an unfair or even unlawful manner. I have used your services, by the way. Frankly, I can't remember. This is quite ridiculous, but I can't remember what the outcome was.
Okay.
No, but that's something to do with my memory.
What was the outcome?
Well, if it was not a positive one, you would have remembered. I'm guessing.
Anyway, so I log on to your site and file a very nice, huge report and say that so-and-so, whatever municipality office or taxman has done me harm and they shouldn't have. What can you do practically? How likely is it that I will be vindicated, provided that I'm in the right, of course?
Exactly, that's the whole point, that you take for granted that you are right. So the first thing that I will be able to offer you as a service would be to ascertain whether you have a point, you have a right, and whether there is something that we can together work towards ameliorating. So the first point is we somehow certify that you have been wrongly treated, unfairly treated, as you said. Roughly 30 to 40% of the complaints that we receive on an annual basis, are complaints of fellow citizens that feel that they have been wronged. But they do not necessarily, this is not necessarily the case. I mean, after investigating their individual complaints, we realize that they have this impression that they have been wrongly treated, unfairly treated by the administration, by the municipality, the government, whatever, you name it, right?
Okay, so your first function is adjudicating it.
Yes.
Okay, the next one is intervening.
Intervening.
Or refusing to intervene, or in the case...
On an individual level, I think the success rate that we have is quite astonishing, quite remarkable. It's very high. But I want to focus not on the individual complaint, because every complaint is different, has some differences, is particular, right? The difficulties that we are experiencing is not on solving your personal complaint or your personal problem. The difficulties we're experiencing is when we are confronted with what we call the systemic problem, the problem that you and many others within society are facing, right? And those problems normally require legislative reform, require policy reform, so they require a form of intervention that necessitates the reflection, the appropriate reflection on the part of the lawmakers. this is where things get a bit more complicated.
Right. And let's go now to the vulnerable groups. We did have an incident recently in this city, just a few days ago, of a group of people, in fact, attacking a number of individuals just because of their difference, because they were different. It doesn't matter why they were different, okay? They happen to be transsexual. I don't even know whether they were transsexual men or transsexual women. But the fact is that they were attacked for being different. Is there any room of obviously this is a penal case, this is a criminal case, yes? This is a matter for the police, or perhaps this is a matter for lawmakers to deal with proactively for the future, and so on and so forth. What would the Ombudsman's role be in such an incident?
When it's a clear-cut criminal case, there's not much I can do. Complaints we get in such a situation is mostly about those who were attacked or were provoked, complain about lack of intervention by the police, or lack of guidance by the burgomaster or the alderman or local authorities. There we can do something. We have been writing on the right of demonstration, important report some 4 years ago, which is explaining why it is everybody's right to explain and express, but in a way that is, let's say, more or less polite, but can be, controversial. But you should be able to express yourself in a way that others will not be in a position to attack you. Although that what you are saying is not, let's say, against probably even to what everybody thinks, but so it comes in the field of human rights, right of expression, being protected by the authorities when you are going to use that right of expression under the Convention of Human Rights or your own constitution. Those are the things we do in such cases.
Okay, and let me turn to you, Mr. Potakis, because this is a case, under your remit, in a way. Do you see any room for action on your part, on the Ombudsman's part, for this particular incident or similar incidents, or even if you spot a wave, a tendency for this kind of incidents to multiply?
We have spotted.
Okay, I don't know your data. You know them.
We have spotted. I wouldn't call it a wave, but a phenomena whereby specific groups of people are being targeted. We are reporting on that, and as Rainier mentioned, our prime concern is to make sure that the competent authorities, public authorities, do their job. This is what the Ombudsman is there for. The Ombudsman is the watchdog for the public administration. Our prime duty, our prime, let's say, responsibility is to make sure that all the other institutions within the state operate and function properly.
So basically, in this case,
protect you, me, and everybody.
In this case, your concern would be that the authorities, the police, for instance, or the judiciary, would deal with the case in exactly the same way as they would deal with another case.
I don't want to comment on the judiciary, but I'd rather not. But and I don't want to comment on the particular incident. But what I think I can safely tell you is that the first thing that an ombudsman would have done would be to look into how this, whatever incident, may have been able to happen in the first place. How was it that this incident occurred in the first place? Why wasn't there the appropriate safeguards so that such an incident would not happen ever? And this I'm not referring only to the law enforcement. I'm referring more generally to how people turn to such a radical sort of behavior to feel that by attacking other fellow members of their society who may have a slight difference in whatever sexual preference or you name it, what is there for them to gain from that? what is the statement that they're trying to make? What is their purpose? What is the point?
Okay, now you're becoming really political in the following way. You know, there is the understanding that groups of people within Western societies that feel or are underprivileged, but the emphasis is on feel underprivileged, are more likely to tilt towards extremist ideologies.
I think this is almost established by now.
Okay.
That people who feel, as you said correctly, rightly said, feel marginalized, not necessarily are marginalized, but feel deep inside that they are being marginalized, that they're being unfairly treated, are the ones who are more likely to resort to radical behavior, to extremist behavior, to sort of a behavior, anti-systemic behavior,
yes.
as it has been commonly popular to term it. I would agree with that assertion, yes.
And that's probably outside your remit, is it?
Well, you know, I like to talk in examples and in stories. During COVID, we had all sorts of demonstrations. We had all sorts of more or less marginalized people. We had people who were in conspiracy theories who wanted to protest on the streets. We had Pegida coming to the streets. We had whatever coming to the streets. And we were talking about being not very popular as an ombudsman by politicians. When I say in my reports, Pegida should have the opportunity to have their manifestation, their protest on the streets, although I fully disagree with whatever their political objectives are, I'm not very popular. But I think it's very important that we guarantee everybody the right to do in a respectful way within the limits of the law and give them the opportunity to protest. The example here yesterday or the day before is not really a manifestation or a protest. That's plain violence, as I read it in the newspapers.
Yes, we did have an incident of protest for and against a particular film in the festival, in this venue.
In that case,
well, outside this venue.
Although I agree with Andreas that we should not go into the judiciary, I have no competence over there, it's not in my remit, but we are guided in these type of cases by the court in Strasbourg, the Human Rights Court. And there, if you go to their caseload, it's very clear how much effort there should be from the side of all the authorities, the governmental authorities, to make it possible to out your opinions, to give a voice to what you think, whatever let's say to the merits of your message. That is out of the question, and I wrote about that in my reports. Governments do not give an sort of judgment on the content of what you are going to demonstrate or say in the streets, but they have the task to guarantee your freedom to protest in the streets. That's very clear. So what's happening here or in Amsterdam or last weekend or whatever, you know, it should be there. And it's sometimes I think it's disgusting. But you will hear me say, even if it is disgusting to the taste of the Ombudsman, we give these people the possibility to voice what they think on the streets.
You did mention the pandemic and...
Can I make a
yeah, sure, of course, go on.
Can I make a political comment on that?
Go on.
Now that I have been branded by you as too much into politics. I think it was roughly 30 years ago. I probably was like a high school or university, that I do remember, again in Greece, riots exploding because of, again, yet another film with religious content or sort of controversial religious content, let me put it this way. It must have been like more than 30 years ago, right? My point and my comment would be, this is an indication of how difficult it is for a society to progress, whatever that means, because progress is a quite relevant and relative notion. But it is an indication that 30-odd years after, we're again debating an incident that took place here during the festival or whenever, and because of a film or because of a poster or because of whatever, because of an artistic expression. And I think, again, I repeat, this is the indication of how much progress there has been in Greek society in the course of the last 3-4 decades.
Or lack thereof, but
You said that. You said that.
but on the other hand, in both cases, there were people, I mean, people who felt they had to protest against it, did enjoy the right to do so. They overstepped that because they tried to disrupt the events.
Exactly.
But you must be quite happy that people can, go out and protest at whatever they feel, even as Rainier said, even if it disgusts you. I'm not saying that this particular one disgusts you, but
it's a bit like throwing tomatoes is all right, and throwing eggs there you trespass the limits. So there is also it's not so strict as we talk about it now. So it's also the situation in itself. How do people behave? What is the activity of the police, who is sort of guiding the people and protecting them? What is the counter demonstration? Where is it taking place? The courts say, and the judges say, especially in Strasbourg, that the counter-protest must be heard by the ones who are protesting.
But then there is danger of disturbances.
Exactly. And
the police comes in the picture.
So when it comes to our office, it's always about the complaints, whether or not the police have acted in an appropriate way, yes or no. And where the limits are, we know it in theory and in the laws and in the judgments, but we have to go into the details of the situation. That's what we do as ombudsman. Face the facts first, then see what happened, and then come with your...
But in principle, if I may, Rainy, I'm sorry. But in principle, I think that turning to what we were discussing earlier, that we are not into party politics, but we are definitely heavily into politics. The principle, I think, is that how do we define our politics? What is it that makes our politics party political neutral, let's say?
Yeah.
I think the safest approach would be that we stick to what we consider, not we, all of us, consider our common values. We are constitutional authorities, and there is a reason why we are constitutional authorities, because we are there to uphold the Constitution, and the Constitution is a set of values. The set of values that our societies have decided upon that will govern us, right?
So your ideology is the Constitution?
Yes, I'm a constitutionalist.
Yes.
And I'm a Europeanist as well. Because the Constitution, the Greek Constitution, is not composed only of the Constitution of 75 as amended several times since then, but it is also the treaty. The treaties of the European Union. It is part of our constitution, of our composition, of our societal composition, our common values. This is what guides us, and this is what we are trying to impose or to make sure that is being respected better within our societies, by governments, but also by whoever is aiming at disrupting this balance, this respect to these values, right? So I think if we stick to that, if we stick to this level, I think we are safe. We may be political without running the risk of getting into party politics.
Yes, to some extent, because the Constitution is open to interpretation. That's why we have constitutional lawyers, which is one of our favorite speciality here in this country. But
there are interpretations and interpretations.
Yes.
Of the law,
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. But we do not have
imaginative and less imaginative.
And we do not have a constitutional court in this country to adjudicate in those cases. So
I don't think it's a bad idea.
No,
we don't.
No. I'm not saying it is. But the pandemic was mentioned, and I just wanted to ask you too. Let me start with you, Mr. Andreas. The pandemic was a period during which some basic freedoms were curtailed temporarily. Many. Okay. How worried were you during that period? And, well, what is your evaluation of the way, I must ask you about Greece, obviously, that the Greek state dealt with this very, very special circumstance?
I think that to answer first your second part of the question, I think that the Greek state as a whole reflected or reacted to the pandemic in the same way that most countries, most states reacted, which was first by exhibiting surprise and not being able to fully comprehend the problem and obviously adopt the necessary policies. It was an unknown danger, an unknown risk. Okay. Something that states are not necessarily designed to address. So I think...
Well, you're quite right. I mean, states are prepared to wage war.
True.
But they're less prepared to deal with the pandemic.
Yes, because the pandemic introduces restrictions to society that normally one would have expected during wartime without having a war. So how do you convince society to comply with those restrictions while at peacetime? It is a very difficult sort of equation. But I think that the effects of the pandemic have yet to be understood. We are still experiencing the first impact of what the pandemic has left to our society. We do experience an increase in violence, widespread violence from various groups. I think that it will take a long time to really comprehend the effect, the impact that the pandemic has had to the entire society. And it's not going to be a pleasant conclusion that we will reach.
Just very briefly, do you think that the state overstepped some boundaries that may have been
yes, of course.
maintained?
Yes, of course it did. Because it didn't know where the limits should have been. I mean, we are in 2024 now, right? If you come to think about the restrictions that were imposed in 2020, 2021, some of them were truly ridiculous, right? You had to send an SMS just to take your dog out to pee. Do you remember that? Or to go for a walk, to stretch. Ridiculous stuff. That made no sense at all, whatsoever. How would I spread the pandemic by walking my dog without sending an SMS? And yet we accepted that. Most of us did, right? And many of us who did not were fined because of that.
Well, we didn't have any violent, well, only very few violent reactions.
No. You asked me, yes. But you asked me whether I thought that the state apparatus as a whole overstepped the boundaries.
Yes.
And I'm telling you, some of the measures that were adopted made absolutely no sense, had nothing to do with the spread of the pandemic or protecting public health.
Can you put it down to something? Why did this happen?
I think because the state did, the entire state apparatus, as we call it, they didn't know what they were confronted with.
So they were in panic, in a sense.
Absolute panic, so better safe than sorry. That was, I think, the motto of the period, right?
Renier?
Agree.
The Dutch experience during this
is more or less the same. We have seen measures, dying elderly people without their families present, waving through the windows, and that was it. We had the right of demonstration was limited. We were fully unprepared. We did not know what was happening. Restrictions on going out late at night after 10 o'clock.
Cases of dementia worsened drastically?
Absolutely. And what we did in my office, we were also not prepared when it comes to the level of legislation. So our laws were not in order. So there was no competence to act, and there had to be all sorts of emergency measures taken without a proper proceeding through Parliament and reflections and advices. So it was a complete, actually a disaster, not only from the point of the virus, but it was also a disaster from the point of the way government was not organized and prepared. And what we saw is, and you can make limitations to all those basic rights, those human rights, your freedom, whatever. In most of the cases, it is also, it can be limited, but it should be provided by law, the limitation itself. It's in all the treaties. My warning was at the time, the limitations are now without, let's say, sort of, when will it end? It was there forever.
Because usually those limitations of rights
for me,
are legal, provided that they are temporary.
For me, it was only acceptable not from a legal point of view, but certainly from the point of view of how do you treat your citizens. That it should be limited. And we have seen police officers being very unhappy by finding people in the streets after 10 o'clock with their dog. I myself, I was asked by an interviewer to come to the studios somewhere in the Netherlands. I had to fill out a paper that I was the ombudsman going to whatever program, and that was enough, by the way. And my driver brought me home, and he went on, and he was stopped by the police.
And he didn't have the paper.
And you know,
She was not the ombudsman.
and he was not the ombudsman. So, but he was not fined in the end. But you know, all these types of crazy things. My position now is that it is what we have done the last 2-3 years since the pandemic ended is even worse, because we know we should be prepared now, and we are not. This can happen tomorrow in the same way, and we will be in the same, you know, sort of strange position that we have not altered our laws. They are not by the time. We are not able, etc. So what we should do is learn from it. And I think I agree with Andreas. The limits have been stretched too far in the way government has restricted the liberties of people. And some of them were absolutely crazy and taken by lunatics.
Well, usually pandemics come every 100 years, but,
no, but
given the increase of transport...
No, but that is on the average, eh?
Yeah.
So it can happen next year and then 200 years not. So that's every 100 years. And the thing is, we know we should prepare better, and we do not. We still have not evaluated the measures we have taken in the Netherlands. The parliamentary inquiry did not even start for some political quarrels there were. So what do you think ordinary citizens like myself look at their governments? That's what
mistrust.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if I may add one point about the pandemic, I think we ombudsmen should be vigilant in relation to I would call them the leftovers of the pandemic, okay? Because I'm particularly concerned about what the pandemic will leave behind. I'll give you an example. I mean, there are several examples. I told you that we still haven't really understood what the impact of the true impact of the pandemic has been on our society.
The assessment is work in progress.
It's a work in progress. It's still early days. We'll see. We do experience, for instance, an increase in minors' violence between minors. We think that it has to do with the pandemic and the fact that they were constrained for a long period of time, not socializing, which plays a role. I'm not a psychologist, I'm a lawyer, but I read into it, okay. I'll give you another example, though, that is perhaps even more serious. And we mentioned it earlier, during the pandemic, a lot of power was given, excessive power was given to the police, right? To monitor compliance with all these restrictive administrative measures that were imposed, that were put in place, so that we would not, contribute to the spreading of the pandemic, etc., by walking our dogs, as we said, right? My concern is how much of this excessive power is still in the psyche and in the mental sort of reflection of the police officer that is walking down the street today. Mm-hmm. I mean, whether he feels or she feels that they still have the power to be as aggressive, as coercive, as violent as they used to during the pandemic. This is something that I'm particularly concerned about. I still don't have the answer, but I'm monitoring it. I'm trying to ascertain, to assess whether for instance, the enforcement agencies, that they have this monopoly of coercion, as we say, whether they feel that they have more freedom to exercise this monopoly
Autonomy,
of coercion
yes.
than they used to.
Institutionally, they don't. I mean, the special framework within which they were operating during the pandemic has been brought to an end. But what you're saying is that psychologically,
Exactly.
we have to sort of imprint on them that
Yes, because when they did exercise that excessive use of coercion, they were not trained to do that. It was something that, because I want to be fair and just, right? I mean, they were called upon to act in a way that they had no training whatsoever. I mean, the police officer is there to hunt down crime, not to hunt down the old man who's sitting at the bench, the corner of Aristotelius Square, without having sent the SMS.
these are very dangerous people.
I know. Potentially, yes. Potentially, yes.
Okay.
Some of them do.
There's one more point on the pandemic. What we are going to be confronted with is long COVID. This is, I think, some 100,000 people in my country are suffering from long COVID, which means they will not be able to work, to earn to get their salaries, to pay for their mortgages, their rents. They will go down step by step.
So that's another vulnerable group for you, isn't it?
And there is similar groups already in the Netherlands, but I'm very much afraid that government will take measures too late to help these.
You're an optimist, aren't you?
Yeah. I'm an optimist. I was born an optimist and lost something along the way, but still it's possible, because we should learn from earlier experiences. These people, these long COVID patients now, we should take very good care of them, because the impact on the rest of their lives and of their families is enormous.
Okay.
And there is a role for the Ombudsman to play.
Okay, now I'm being told we must bring this to an end. And before we do that, can you tell me in 30 seconds the one thing that would improve and empower and make the Ombudsman as an institution more effective?
That's not about me, it's about government. If they do not communicate in the correct way with the people living in my country, there will be no better situation. So it all starts with carefully making contact and carefully listening and asking people, what do you need? And being honest as a governmental body to say what you can provide and what not.
And you?
Less interference with the work of the Ombudsman.
Okay, you got another 25 seconds.
I think I've said it.
Thank you. Okay, that is the end. This was Mr. Andreas. Sorry, excuse me. Yes, of course. A question from the floor.
I heard about specific complaints that you have, so you investigated. But how do you choose other cases? How do you choose these other cases that you monitor?
Well, the good part of our work is we're a bit like King Midas. If we touch something, it becomes gold. So everything we take and we investigate is something worthwhile what we're doing. But it should also be programmatic. So what we did in our office, at least, we started it some 8-9 years ago. We found some themes: poverty, access to governmental bodies, fundamental rights, the environment. 4 or 5 of these themes and pillars. And within the pillars, we have our programs, and we annually make new plans on what we are going to do in these systemic investigations by our own motion. And we have others influencing us on what to choose and what to do. So it's not only just ourselves. We think, oh, well, this is a good idea, let's do it. The old King Midas syndrome, I would say. But what we try to do now is ask people who are working in those pillar fields, what do you think should be our next topic to investigate? So we went into housing, we went into elderly people and Alzheimer, we went into, so that's the way we are planning our bigger own initiative investigations.
Is it a very similar way to the one you worked in?
Yes, but I would like to add also that when it comes to own initiative investigations and cases that we are taking up, I think we have a set of criteria, and we actually have it in law. I think the most important one has to do with the topic of, or the theme, or the title of this talk, which is that we open up an own initiative investigation when we feel that the complainant or the potential alleged victim does not have the voice or the power to voice his or her concern, his or her problem, right?
So it's not just a matter of numbers. It's not just how many people are affected. That is a criteria.
It is a criterion, but not necessarily. Not the only one.
Not only that.
Not the exclusive one. I think we try to use our resources in the best possible manner, and we open up own initiative investigations, especially when we feel that one person or many people do not have the necessary power, voice, access to voice their concern, their problem, etc. This is, I think, the most important, perhaps the most important criterion for opening up an own initiative investigation. Okay.
Would foreign nationals lacking the medium of language be very often in that state?
Of course, not only lacking the medium of language, but also foreign nationals who may be illegally residing in Greece. So they are under the radar of the law.
Yeah.
So
they don't have
living
access to
they're living in the gray part of society, or the black part of society. They don't have access to anything. They cannot have access to the public administration, to services, to benefits, to you name it. These are the most vulnerable ones and the most marginalized ones. And of course, let me put it differently. I think that our democracies and our sort of systems and our models of a society is not served by citizens who are simply sitting in front of a screen, a TV screen or whatever, at their comfortable sofas, and expect us to do the work for them. This is not how it works. We want vigilant, we want active citizens. We want people to come into our office and file their complaint and take the responsibility for filing the complaint, right? This is what we want. This is how our democracies will be better served. However, not all of us can do that. And this is where we want to make more use of our own initiative powers to give voice to those voiceless people.
Μία ερώτηση στον Έλληνα συνήγορο θα ήθελα να κάνω. Ή δύο, αν μου επιτρέπετε, αλλά τουλάχιστον μία. Επειδή είπατε ότι η εξουσία σας περνάει και εκτός των συνόρων, συμβουλεύετε ευρωπαϊκά όργανα, θεσμούς. Πρόσφατα το Ευρωπαϊκό Κοινοβούλιο δημοσιοποίησε μια έκθεση για το κράτος δικαίου στην Ελλάδα. Δεν ξέρω αν θέλετε να τη σχολιάσετε. Εγώ θα ήθελα τη δική σας άποψη για το κράτος δικαίου στην Ελλάδα, γιατί όπως αναφέρθηκε και στη συζήτηση, και εσείς το παραδεχτήκατε, αλλά και το είδαμε να συμβαίνει και πρόεδροι άλλων ανεξάρτητων αρχών δέχθηκαν πιέσεις από την κυβέρνηση. Δεν είναι βέβαια στις κατηγορίες των ευάλωτων που συζητάμε, αλλά είναι άνθρωποι που παίζουν σημαντικό ρόλο στην ποιότητα της δημοκρατίας μας. Επομένως, ποια είναι η δική σας εικόνα για το κράτος δικαίου στην Ελλάδα?
Τώρα αυτό είναι...
Αυτό.
Maybe in English, yes. I mean, a proper answer to your question would take a long time. Maybe we can discuss it later. Because my view on the state of the rule of law in Greece, I mean, it could take
a week.
Yeah. However, I simply, coincidentally, we were discussing it coincidentally, I was interviewed yesterday by the Commission on the next report that will be prepared on the state of the rule of law in Greece. Obviously, I was interviewed, and the questions, there were specific questions that were put to me. I could have thought of many more questions that I could have answered. So I don't want to comment on the actual resolution of the European Parliament. There are many things there that I think we would all agree. There are other things that I don't feel that I am in the right sort of position to comment, especially when it relates, all those that relate to the judiciary and the quality of the judicial process in Greece. However, I think I will stick to that. I gave my honest answers yesterday, and I'm hoping that they will be included in the report that will be published soon by the Commission on the state of the rule of law in Greece. However, personally, I had so many other questions that I could have asked myself.
Sanchez?
I'm not going to ask them now. Maybe later.
Yes, my question is to both of you. So, I don't know, are all ombudsmen in Europe created equal? What I mean is, like, obviously you talk to each other about your work, what you do and stuff. So I was wondering, is it the same being an ombudsman in Greece and in the Netherlands when it comes to access to the authorities, response by the authorities, them making your lives easier? Is Mr. Potakis at a disadvantage here? Are you at an advantage? How does this play a difference in how effective an ombudsman can be in a member state of the EU?
Me first? There are big differences in competencies. Andreas and I, we are ombudsmen in the more or less traditional way, which is we are not a human rights institution. You have more mandates than I have, but we are more or less forged by the way the Scandinavians once thought of the ombudsman. The Swedish-Danish model, we more or less copied actually. So there's many others with many mandates, but in the essence of the work we do is for all actually the same. Be it sometimes somewhat broader, or somewhat narrower. What is happening now in Europe is that all the ombudsmen, being or not being a human rights institution, we have human rights, let's say, on number one in our work, which comes from the Council of Europe, Venice Principles, and we are all working in that spirit. What we come across is different governments. Sometimes governments are somewhat more lenient. I think in my country, if I compare it to some of the colleagues, not so much Andreas, but there's others who really suffer of being an ombudsman because they're never heard and never listened to. So there is big differences also in the way it is accepted by the authorities, parliament, governments, etc., etc. That's a sort of rough first answer. And the problems we come across are very similar. It is about people are not heard, not listened to, problems are not solved, debates do not end in a sort of solution and a learning. The digitalization of governments is in all the countries a big problem. Elderly people, vulnerable groups, illiterate, so and those are the ones that is very common when we gather, and we do that twice or three times a year. It's always those topics that we have to discuss.
Okay, so first, ombudsmen are not the same. We're not the same as in terms of our competences, as Rainier mentioned. We have similarities, but we're not the same. We're not the same as individuals, as personalities. And I think that we were discussing this earlier today. One of the characteristics of the Ombudsman institution is that it is an institution that can be somehow personified. It is an institution that has a face, a human face, right? It's not a board. It's not a faceless, humanless sort of institution. He is the Ombudsman, right? He represents the institution of the Ombudsman, but he is actually the Ombudsman. So you can relate to that. And it is important that Rainier is the Ombudsman and not somebody else. Somebody else may have done things differently. within obviously the scope of his competences, clearly. So we're not the same in terms of competences, we're not the same in terms of personalities.
But it's very interesting that the institution itself doesn't have another name. It has the name of the person.
Yes.
Yeah? Like, it's not like the judiciary where we say justice.
Yes.
It's like saying Falcone, for, you know,
Yeah.
whatever. It's personified as...
Yeah.
The other regulatory authorities, for instance, are not.
True. I'm sure that Rainier has a view on this. Yes, I'm sure that Rainier has a view on this. I have a view on this. I think that it is so because it better serves the purpose of the ombudsman. The proximity that the ombudsman should have with the complainant, right? It is psychological. It makes it more humane, a more humane institution, more approachable institution, right? It somehow scales it down from something, you know, mythical institution to, you know, human. You know, there he is. He's, you know, walking down the street, whatever. But there are also other differences between ombudsmen, and I want to comment on one because I think this is how we started this talk. Independence. We're not this equally independent, all of us. Earlier, when we were flying to Thessaloniki, I was discussing with Rainier, and I was telling him yet again how jealous I am of his institution and his sort of arrangement, that he enjoys greater levels of independence simply by one fact. I'm not going to mention all the differences that we have, but simply one, that he does not have to negotiate his budget with his Ministry of Finance. And I do. And you know, nobody negotiates with the Ministry of Finance, right? I mean, it's a kind of a contradiction of terms, you understand? You know, you don't negotiate, you are told that this is going to be your budget, whether you like it or not, okay? And in the case of the Dutch ombudsman and many other ombudsmen across Europe, they have the possibility of actually going to Parliament and negotiate their budget. They can present their strategy and say, okay, listen, for the next 3 years, we are going to focus on this and that. And we need an additional amount of money to do that. And they get it because they speak to people.
Yeah, okay.
Usually they do because they speak to people that are receptive, that are, well, at least they will listen. The Ministry of Finance doesn't even listen, right?
Well, it's not there to listen.
Exactly.
Thank you for your presentations and discussion. I had a question about a particular topic that has been on kind of in a lot of conversations in the film community and cultural context here in Greece, but also internationally, and I'd like your thoughts on it. The question has to do with the current moment and the ways that we see that kind of tactics of censoring or silencing or ignoring voices from certain parts of the world are happening in the cultural sector, and the absence, which is very notable around voices from Palestine specifically, and at this period that we're witnessing enormous violence and genocide in Gaza. And we have a really big concern as to why in some cases we see festivals and cultural institutions supporting artists from some regions in for example, the Ukraine recently, but we don't see the similar sort of support to other diasporic communities, such as the Palestinian community in Greece or in Europe in general, across the US and elsewhere. So I would like to hear your comments on that, and if there's something that you recommend or that you urge towards the cultural sector specifically in looking into this and changing this for more inclusive spaces. Thank you.
Is this within your remit?
The honest answer is that depends. I have been more in general with artists, filmmakers, musicians, their position in society and the way they are sometimes ignored, and the art, how important it is not supported by governments. It is not in my remit to say, you know, let's go and subsidize this or that, but at the very moment that there is active governmental action taken towards people, yes, then there is a role for us to play. I think you will not...
So basically, if there were a government intervention...
Censorship.
with the Thessaloniki Film Festival and pressure applied not to have any sort of Palestinian films, then that would be within your image.
Yes. And then it becomes immediately political. So you will have to be at my table, and we have to discuss what can I do, what can I not do, what is in your best interest. It will be firstly a conversation on what is the aim, why do we do it, what should the outcome be. Andreas and I, as members of the board of the European antenna of the International Ombudsman Institute, we have released on this particular topic of the Palestinians in mid-October our vision, which is more or less general but well meant, and that is that anybody who is in such a conflict should uphold the rule of law and the human rights, and etc., etc., etc. That is the role we can play more in general, but we will not take complaints from Gaza. Be it, for example, in another situation, when the mother lives in the Netherlands and has a title to reside there, and her children are still in Gaza, and our government does not take any new, etc. So sometimes in individual cases, when I can make a relationship between governmental activities of Netherlands authorities and what's happening over there I will take action. But I have to be very careful, because if I'm taking action and afterwards people say, oh look, here is an ombudsman that is losing his way and acting beyond his remit or competence, the effect will be disastrous for the one who came to us and in the office. So it is very important topic you are touching upon, and it is very tense also for the people working in my office and for myself. But yes, I would not say you're not welcome in my office straight in general, but I would invite you to come and sit with me and see what we can do.
And you wouldn't be able to intervene with Mrs. Jaladot, for instance, why she has not included a particular film in the program?
I'm not going to censure her.
No.
It's not my job. Listen, freedom of expression is it's a constitutional right, and it's a fundamental right. And freedom of artistic expression is a fundamental right. If there is a state body that compromises the free expression of any free artistic expression, or if there is state intervention when it comes to free artistic expression, then this is something that the Ombudsman could look into to see whether that intervention is justified or not. Because I don't want to give you the wrong impression. The mere fact that the state may intervene in this and that doesn't mean that it necessarily is wrong, or it is operating outside the confines of legality, right? It may be a necessary intervention. I'm not referring to the particular case that you're mentioning. I'm generalizing here, okay? So the state intervenes, that's its role. That's why we have it, right?
So we go to your first step, which is adjudicating.
Have they
done anything wrong?
We have to make sure first that they intervened, so they compromised the freedom of artistic expression, and then why did they do that, and whether they were justified in doing that. This is something for the Ombudsman to look into, because, as I mentioned, freedom of expression is a fundamental right, so it falls under our remit in that sense. Just like Rainier was mentioning earlier, that he may have a lot of differences with some people who may be expressing or trying to make use of their right to demonstrate, but he will fight for them to demonstrate, right? For them to have the right to demonstrate. It's a similar sort of kind of line of argumentation.
And what in the case of the Netherlands is very important is there a governmental decision taken, and can you challenge that decision before the courts? Because if it can be challenged before the courts, I would refer you to the courts in the first place, and then probably later see what the outcome of the proceedings are, and then see whether there is an additional role to play for the Ombudsman. When, for example, there's a matter of subsidies and money, and this festival was only getting money when you do not view this or that film. That might be challenged before the courts, but also can be a case before the Ombudsman. But the courts, in the case you made, are very important. So if there is a sort of behavior and a decision made by governmental authorities that can be challenged, the Ombudsman will refer you to the courts first and later see whether, after the decision is taken, there is room for the Ombudsman to do something more than that.
Which is something very similar to what you do under Greek law, under your constitution. Is that right? I mean, while a case is before court, you've nothing to do with it, yes, and you just look at it afterwards.
I look at the execution of the court decision, whether the court decision is being respected. And as we all know, the institution that is failing to respect court decisions the most is the state itself.
Yes, particularly in civil cases, I suppose. Compensation and so on.
Yeah, admin cases. I mean, there are decisions of the Supreme Administrative Tribunal in Greece ruling on, say, pensions, on the pension system, and they just flatly refuse to apply them.
Okay, on that note, I think that's all we have time for. I must thank you very much. I must thank Reinier van Zuchten, the Dutch Ombudsman, and Andreas Potakis. You see, I didn't say Mr. van Zuchten this time, so there's equality. Andreas Potakis, his Greek counterpart. Okay, Mr. Potakis, the Greek counterpart. And thank you. Many thanks to the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, who invited us here and put this event under its auspices, and of course the film festival, the documentary film festival, and the Thessaloniki Film Festival that has been personally the director, Ms. Chalador, who have been great hosts to us. Thank you very much for being with us.